Welcome back, Purrfect peeps, to Purrfect.dev. Today we have Debbie. Debbie is the head developer advocate at Bit. Debbie's also a Microsoft MVP, GitHub star, if you can't tell from behind her, Google GDE, Cloudinary MDE, Auth0 ambassador, and Nuxt ambassador. In her free time, which I don't think she has any, Debbie's also loves to run and bike. Welcome, Debbie.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I had to point out all your GitHub stuff because pre-show we were talking about your Octocat behind you. So
I know, it's so beautiful.
And all the GitHub star stuff. It's awesome.
I know, I get so many presents and awards and stuff. It's really cool.
Well, you kind of do a lot of things, so it's probably very equal to what you're doing.
I know. I have no life. I don't sleep.
You do like 10,000 workshops and get like a mug. I mean, that seems totally fair. So Debbie is here to talk all about composing modern applications with Bit. And if you are wondering what Bit is, you can go to bit.dev, but we're going to talk all about it on today's podcast. There are a couple moments where we're probably going to do a lot on the video side. So if you're missing out on the audio side, go ahead and jump on YouTube and we'll be showing it off there. So thank you. All right, Debbie, first off, what the heck is Bit?
Okay, I'm going to rephrase the question. What do you think it is?
Ooh, a composable component library for web stuff.
A way to build design systems.
Ooh,
I like that. Sounds great. Yeah, so Bit can be whatever you want it to be in a way. Bit is a tool for building component-driven development. So if you want to build a design system, a component library, an application, anything that's involving components, then Bit is there to help you build components. Because normally we build applications, right? And we all say, yeah, but we all build components, right? Because we're building our application with components and we put the components in the app. So we're building component driven in our mind. And I used to think yeah, I build component driven. All my application is made out of components. And they're like, yeah, but your components are stuck in your app. I'm like, yeah, but that's cool. I don't need them anywhere else. It's like, yeah, but when you scale and build another application, what do you do? I just copy and paste them and put them in the other repo. It's like, yeah, what about you build another one? Yeah, just copy and paste and put in another one. And then and then you got these three applications you're now trying to maintain, that same component that you're maintaining across those repos, and now it's complete and utter disaster. And it's okay in my case because I do only have one app for my website, and I maybe might have another one in the future for my streaming stuff or whatever. But imagine a large enterprise that has many applications, and trying to maintain all those components, all those applications, all those repos is a nightmare. So Bit makes it easier by basically allowing you to have components that are individually kind of packaged and put in a cloud and then can be brought down and used anywhere.
So can we talk about what kind of components you're actually creating when you're doing this? So Angular components, Vue components, just straight up web components built in Stencil or something? Does that work for everything?
Yeah, so at the moment we have React support, React Native, Node, Angular, and lit elements. So Vue is coming soon. I know I've been promising this for ages, but we are. Vue is next on the list, and Stencil would be also on that list. The idea is to have that you can do everything. But at the moment, we obviously need to build compilers specifically for that kind of framework and stuff. So it has to be done in the kind of order. But yeah, you're building components. Take React. That's the most the one we have the most. What do you say?
Support or example?
Support for and demos and everything for it. So it's the best one at the moment. And Angular is next in line, and there's a lot of work being done on the Angular one. So it's just getting better and better and better.
I haven't heard you say Svelte yet.
I know. Rich Harris will kill me. Yeah, I would love to get Svelte support in there as well, because that's definitely it's definitely an upgrowing framework that is going to get better and better, and more people are going to use it for sure. Maybe we could just get Rich to help us build a compiler for it.
That would be fantastic.
Nice. So in a typical flow, And I just want to break this down so I think I might understand it again. Like Brittney designs things, and she often will help me either code them or I will code them. But at the end of the day, we will have like a component, whether it's a search bar or something like that. Is that still typically the process? Like someone is creating it in like Figma, and then we're creating a component, and then do we load that to bit, or do we load it to like an internal npm still? How does that work?
Yeah, so I would normally take the Figma design and embed it into my component documentation. So while I'm building the component, I've got the Figma file there, and I've got my composition of what the component will look like rendered on its own. And then I can see, like, make sure, is it okay? Or just like being able to click and open that Figma file, because I always get lost in Figma because there are like so many designs everywhere. Yeah. So being able to find it very easily is really important to me. When we build bit components, it's the only difference between like, your main component and a bit component is that we build them in a folder. So say you're building that search bar, maybe it's called search bar in a folder that has an index file that exports the component. Then you have the component file. Then you have the test file, because we should all be writing tests. Then you have the documentation file, because you want to document that component, because if you're going to use it, other people are going to use it. They need to know how to use it, what it does, what the API is, what prop types, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And then you want the composition one, which is basically how you can see that search bar under different, with different props, et cetera, with different looks and feels, maybe different theme, et cetera. So you've got to do a little bit of extra work because you have more to do, but you gain so much more. Now we have generators, so you just got to generate, and they'll just generate all those files for you. And then you have to write the test yourself. Sorry. And but yeah, you do that, and then you add your documentation. But all the components, when you create them, all those files are created for you. So once you have that component, you've got that search bar, and now you can decide again, are you working locally or are you actually pushing it to the cloud? So you could be working locally for ages, building an application and then export everything later on. Or you have an application already and you're just adding something new to it. So then it will export that component, which you can export it wherever you want. The best one is obviously to export it to the Bit cloud, because you get better integration, which is kind of like saying Next.js, it's better to deploy to Vercel because you're going to get, a lot more cooler things. But you can also deploy a Next.js app to Netlify, and there's no problem, right? So you can self-host the components yourself. You could publish them to NPM yourself if you want, or you can publish them to the Bit cloud, where you're going to get a much better experience. But again, that's up to you. Then once they're on the cloud, they're easy to see. You can find them. We have the same local development environment is now on the cloud, where you're actually able to have that same user experience. You can see that Figma file, and you can see that component composition. And then your product manager, your designer can just open that link and say, oh my God, you did a terrible job. Or yeah, that looks perfect, and et cetera. So, and then once it's on the cloud, then it's easy to just get that link and use it using NPM or using Yarn to install it into any application. So if we're using React, for example, you can install it into your Next.js application, into your Gatsby application, into your Create React application, or just into another component.
Are people using like Storybook to show this off, or is there a way in Bit to like kind of show the components and then show them being composed as well?
Yeah, so we have our own compositions, which is basically your way of showing it in different, states, etc. Okay. Storybook does give you a little bit extra, I think. So it depends on what you want, but it's also a lot more work. You in Storybook, do you need that amount of things, etc.? Like they have all the knobs and things like that. So that's again up to you. If you already have everything built in Storybook, then it's just easy to just bring Storybook into it, because you've already got that stuff created. So just integrate it with Bit and you've got it. And if you don't, then you could just build it through our compositions, and then you've got it there as well. So that's just completely up to you how you want to work.
Does Bit provide you just a GUI to look through like the stuff that you develop locally once you push it up to the cloud? Or does it have something like a CMS where designers and other people besides developers could input into it?
Yeah, so we don't have the collaboration part right now. We will have it on the roadmap, but to be able to like comment and say, that's what we are missing for 100%. So at the moment, it's not just the GUI to see it, but what you're seeing as well is like the documentation, the composition, the tests. So you can actually see that the tests are passing. what tests are written, right? Because sometimes you could write a terrible test,
Mhm.
it should render with text. Sometimes I write terrible tests, but you can actually see those tests. You can see the dependency graph. So you can actually see what components are being used by that component and how it was constructed. And then you might say, oh, that component has got some library I don't want to use, or some JavaScript something, or I don't know, whatever. And then you can see all the versions of that component. So you can actually see the whole changelog and go back in time, and you can install a specific version of that component because maybe the updated version is too modern for your one for whatever reason. I don't know why, whatever, React 17 to 18, and you want the React 17 version, not the 18 version. I don't know. So you can see all those things in that exported version. So it's very easy for you to make a decision on, do I like that component? Should I use that component? Is that component, going to suit my needs, etc.? And yeah, it's not just giving you the component. Like on NPM, you just see the component, right?
Yeah.
You get a lot more.
So it gives you more stuff there. You mentioned being able to use the props and seeing that in different ways. So is there some sort of code sandbox where you can plug in different props to that component?
Yeah, there's a live playground in the documentation. So basically you can play around with it and you can see it change live, and then you can break it, you can, add your own stuff to it, and you can see. And then it's very easy for you as you're playing with it to then kind of go back to the developer and say, hey, I'm missing this prop, or this doesn't work as expected. And that's how the collaboration, comes in. That basically the component, when it's designed by the designer, sometimes it's missing stuff, right? Sometimes the designer designed one thing, then the developer starts to use it and it's great, but then the next developer goes, oh, but I need this. And as they're playing in the playground, without actually even using it, they can then go back and ask, the designer to implement it, the developer to implement it, and then they can go and use it. Or they can say, no, I need a new component. I'm going to build my own based on that component. And you can also see all the code, right? So you can just click the code and actually see it. So you could even just copy the code and build a new component based on that, if that's what you needed, right?
That actually leads to my next question. So if you pick a framework and you build it in, say, React, and you push that React code up, is everything then in React, or could you use that in other frameworks?
No, everything's in React. So it would have a peer dependency of React, and it would need React. You could then decide to do all that other stuff to get components rendered from React into Angular and all that, if that's what you wanted to do, but you'd have to do that yourself.
When you talk about the dependencies like that, I'm used to building. We've built large scale MFEs, micro front end for Angular, and we often use NX for that. And NX can tell you when a component is used in anything, and it only tests those areas. Is that something that Bit can handle, or is that it's beyond the scope of Bit?
So in what way, and what are we calling a component here?
Yeah, sure. So let's say, for instance, we have a search bar and a search button. This is a terrible example, but
yeah. I like buttons.
We know that button affects the search bar because it's used within an outer wrapper. And so we have version 1 to version 2 of that button coming out. So it knows it only has to test that when we go to build it, and not the entire tree down to the page below it as well. Is that something Bit can do, or does it not understand the tree of components?
Yeah, no. So Bit understands everything that it depends on. So that's why we have the whole dependency graph of every single component. So if you're in your workspace, is what we call it when we're building, say, the component library, right? So we're in the component library workspace where we have our button component and our search bar component. And if we modify that button component, for example, I don't know, add a new prop to it, we modify that, it's going to auto tag every component that is using it. So the search bar will go, I need a new version that's going to include that new button. And every other component, it's going to just auto tag everything for you. So then you just make one change and then you export it. Now, if you're using that button in another repo, for example, another workspace, then it's a different story, right? Because it can't auto tag it because you're somewhere else. Yep. So then it's up to you to install it and say, I need to bump up that version, right?
And that's I was going to say, that's where the versioning actually saves you, right? You could stay on an older version of the component then.
Exactly.
Unless someone changes the back end for that data and doesn't tell you. Yeah. Anyway, horror stories. This might be a good time to dive into some of our more visual examples. Do you want to talk a bit about the scope graph?
Okay.
Bring it up here. Oh, if I share my screen, we could. Oh, it's going to be one
I
of those
can't
days.
see anything.
You'd think by now we'd have learned how to share screens, right? Yeah, so this is a scope graph of a load of different scopes, right? Scopes are where your components, where you put your components. So you can have teams owning scopes. So you might have, like in this example, it's kind of hard to see on my end, so I'm trying to read it. But you can have like
Does that work better?
No, it's just a little fuzzy, but it's okay. Don't worry.
Okay.
So yeah, the e-commerce one is a scope, right? So that's a team that works on e-commerce components. What are e-commerce components? Product cards, shopping cart, anything to do with e-commerce, right? And that's one specific team. And they're using the components from the base UI, scope. And the base UI are like your buttons, your search, things that are used across multiple different, applications, much more like your component library, right? And then you've got, I've got a few different examples here, but you've got the React shoe store down the bottom, and the shoe store is using the e-commerce one, and it's using, nice that you clicked that, because then you can see the arrow of where it's going, and you can see its dependencies, and you can also see its dependence. If you click on the other tab on the right, you'll see the actual dependence of that as well. So this has no dependence, right? Because the shoe store is like, the top level. The e-commerce has a lot of dependence, right? Base UI, electronic store, perfume store, shoe store, sports store, made loads of stores. You can't buy anything, but it's all good. So this is how you can kind of see what's going on and how your libraries or your scopes are being used, who's using what, and how the connections are. And that's basically how you'd separate things. So they're all actually in individual repos in GitHub.
And just to like reiterate, because it's kind of blowing my mind a little bit, all of these different components could be created in different ways as well. So you could have like Angular elements versus stencil building something versus XYZ, correct?
So these are earlier with React, right?
Yeah, these are all React. This is a React project.
Okay.
But then we have the exact same project in Angular. And what we're doing in Angular is we are sharing certain components that can be shared across React and Angular. What are those kind of components? CSS components, right? They're able to share entity components. So our product card needs a load of entity data, like the basically the types and stuff, right? So that's being shared because we want the same JSON to come back with the same types. We want to make sure that's okay. So the Angular project is using certain things, but it's not using specific React code. Any kind of JavaScript helpers as a component, for example, it could use that, but it can't use a React component, right?
Okay.
So does this avoid like a build process on the end? Because we're using the same framework, we don't actually need to have a build step in there to do this process, right?
So the build stuff is done like when you're building the application, right? So when you're building the application, the components then they're not built as such, right? Because if you're using Sass, then you need at your application level to include Sass.
But
right?
You don't have to compile these components in like another extra step. It's just whatever your application needs, they're in there. Yeah, so that's where something like having Svelte, I think, might be nice because it has that compiler built in, but you do add that build step. So that's why I was trying to get to that, because if you had a compiler and a compiled component, maybe you could use Angular, Vue, React. You could use whatever you wanted in many different teams, and then it could all compile to just the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Yeah, no, these are not compiles. These are like, it needs to go to that step at app level.
Gotcha.
It's tricky too, because with certain languages, like if you're trying with Angular, I would assume you would still need the Angular library as part of that. And so it becomes part of the application, unless you like iframe that piece in or something like that.
And then you're like,
which gets fun.
Yeah.
We have a whole talk about that with Alex Gogan. Go check it out. So I wanted to show off the other example that you had brought up with the shoe store. Let me pop that up a sec. So this is also another way to kind of look at the different composition, correct?
Yeah, so this is the highlighter here. And like this can open in another window if you press the arrow button, but you can leave it as here, it's fine.
Okay.
But as you're scrolling over with the highlighter, you can actually see where each component is coming from. So that button there is the theme toggler, that's from the React UI, that button is coming from the base UI library. This is coming from Team Bit Design, right? This is not even in any of my repos. This is coming from someone else because they just built a really good component that I decided I didn't want to build it myself. I'll just take theirs because it works. So that's coming from someone else's, not from mine, which is, totally possible. The hero, this is like base UI. The button is base UI. And down below the product card, that's going to be coming from e-commerce. So the UI card, so this is a basic UI card and the UI heading. So basically, it shows you where everything is coming from. I think the price is coming from the e-commerce. So
where is the site coming from?
Where's the site?
Is this something you built with just components, like piecing them together?
Well, what is an application? It's just a component, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a component.
So you just put components together to build that page. It's not like feeding in from a website or anything live.
Yeah. No, if you go back, Alex, to that example, I'll talk you through it a bit more. So in this case, you can see the pages, right? So the pages are like all my pages there. The about page is very ugly. But like the children page is a bit nicer, for example, which has all the children's shoes, right? And the men has all the men's shoes and stuff. You can scroll down and you'll see the page. This is the documentation here, right? So these are just pages, which means then I can take those pages and I could actually just drop it into a Next application, a Create React application, etc., just as that actual page. In this case, above, we've actually created an application that's using Create React app under the hood, which is why you are seeing, the application, etc.
Sorry, my mouse died during that example, but
I saw. But yeah, so basically, this is just a page component. In Bit, everything is a component. So your component can be as small as a button or as big as an application.
Oh, okay.
So if I get to the outside, I guess you can't see the tag. It's probably up above, but there's that.
Yeah, I see the pink outline.
Yeah.
It's outlining the page component. That's cool.
And then the app, if you go to the shoe store, actually, I can show you a little bit about, just get rid of that banner at the top, because then it'll be easier. It always just gets in the way. And now, right, see the code? When you go across from dependencies, see the code block. I never see it as a code block, but it is, right? So if you go to the TS file, which is the app.tsx file, So this is the application, right? And you can see I'm importing all those pages. So importing the home page, the women page, the men page, the children, the about, they're all pages just being imported. Then there's the header and the footer being imported to make up what's, in between it. The layout, the link, the theme. And then I've got just as you would construct any app, your browser router, your switch, your root path in there between the header and the footer. And that's what's rendering the pages.
How would you install these? Are these NPM components or does Bit have a CLI that you can install those?
Yeah, so if you go to the use box on the top right, see that green box, this will tell you how to use it. So
cool.
The first one is Bit because maybe you're creating a Bit workspace. So you can just copy that and then Bit install it. And then you're working with Bit, it's just easier. But if you were in, Create React App or Next.js and you don't have Bit as part of your application, then you would just use NPM or Yarn, depending on whichever your favorite is. And the only thing you have to do is, you see that bit at the bottom that says configure as a scoped registry. So you just have to set that up, which basically, it's just a little extra step that adds it to is it the NPA or I don't know, whatever file it is. If you click that, it'll tell you. And you just run that once and then it's going to store that into that file. And then it basically allows you to use NPM or Yarn to install those components. Or you can use Bit and just install them. And then it's just using it like you would any NPM package, import it and use it.
Yeah, that's really cool. We've done that quite a bit. And it's interesting because when you have protected NPMs, you can put it in your NPM RC and then just pull it in as that scope. So that's really neat. Can you talk a little bit about, just as we were going through that, what the difference or what more of the benefit is to hosting on BitCloud then? If I was sitting down with my boss and said, we have to do this, is there these 7 things BitCloud's better at than just hosting out of NPM ourselves?
Well, if you're going to host it on NPM, have you ever hosted a load of components on NPM?
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. So basically, even if you're hosting on NPM with Bit, we're going to manage the package JSON for you and stuff like that. So you don't have to do all that. So it's easy to export it and it's easy to publish them on NPM. And I have a few components up there. I can never find them, right? Because they don't have that searchability. They don't have that ease of like finding things, the user experience, etc. So you can also export to NPM and export to BitCloud. So you can actually do both if you want to, for whatever reason. Maybe you just wanted to have them on NPM as well, because that's also possible. But then there's a couple of other things that we're building that's coming in, which is not released yet, but it's in the pipeline, which is something called Ripple CI. And that's basically what will allow you to see that search bar, and you've uploaded that button. Now the search bar and button are in different places. And Ripple CI is going to say, hey, that search bar is going to look like this with the new button. Do you accept those changes? So it's going to have that more continuous integration kind of thing built into it. And that's kind of where it's more, you're getting more benefits because you're getting the integration with the CI, etc.
Gotcha.
How does the versioning work with that? Does it bump it automatically if you create a new version of the component, or do you have to manually do that?
So if you're in the same workspace, it manually, it automatically bumps it for you, because you're, obviously going to use it. That component is affected by it, end of story. But if you're installing it, which is different, you're now in a different repo, completely separate from this one component, then you have to install it. And this is where the CI comes in, because then you don't have to go to that one, pull it down and, say, oh yes, I do want the new version. And the CI will say, a new button has been created. Do you want to update the search bar, the product card, the header, the footer? These are what they're going to look like. And then you kind of say, yes, no, 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 yes, no, or whatever.
Okay. So will it just install the latest version and then it asks you if you want any future updates, or how does that work?
So when you first build it, you install the latest version, right? Or the version you specifically want, because you put the @ sign and you put whatever version you've decided to choose, right?
Okay.
So then you can also decide, if you want, if you want it to be in like the small semver versions, right? Or like if it's a version 2 update, if it's a breaking change major version, then that's not going to update automatically. You've got to do that when you think is the right time to do it.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just the same way you would manage versions for any packages.
All right.
Yeah, very cool. I feel like I'm missing something, but it's like there's so much that Bit gives you that creating component libraries is just such a pain every time you do it. But consistency across different platforms is key, so you can always bring these into the separate platforms and things like that.
Yeah.
What am I missing, Debbie? There has to be more to
okay.
the thing, right?
So open up the example again and let me kind of talk you through something that maybe might complicate things so much that you're like mind blowing. So if you click on just where it says Learn Bit React just before the shoe store, just so we go back to the actual scopes. Yeah. So this will take you through, this is all your components, right? So this is how you kind of see what components you have, etc. And you can obviously search for the components using the search bar, using Command K, you can kind of find things, whatever. And these are all the actual scopes. So if you kind of click on the scopes tab there, and this will kind of show you, this is what I've got, right? I've got a data fetching, I've got base UI, e-commerce, shoe store, Purrfect store, electronic store, sports store, Figma example. And again, this will grow as we build more and more things, right? So this is how you can have, teams own different scopes. So your base UI team, they own this one. The e-commerce team, they own this one. That means that they can deploy things separately, right? The base UI team, their code is not mixed with the e-commerce team. They can deploy everything on their own. They don't step on each other's toes. If you've got a junior developer coming on board, they don't have this big, massive mono repo to try and figure out what's going on. They're only working in base components. They're only going to see base components. Now, the great thing about it is that you could actually use the components. So when I was building the shoe store, for example, right? And remember, the base UI is in one repo, the e-commerce is another repo, the shoe store is in another repo. We can do a thing which is called import. If you just want to open any component for now, just click on base UI, for example. And let's just take the UI button component. That's kind of probably the best component I have. You can see it on the left, down the bottom, yeah. Or you can just scroll and find the button that looks like a button. But yeah, so this one is as I said, this is how you're able to change the things live. If you change that prop from primary to secondary in there, you'll see that button change.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just like a code sandbox where you can pick and choose, but you can edit any code block.
Yeah, this is just in the documentation. So you like create this so people can play around with your, and you can see I've done a button, which is a primary button as an A tag with the href of going to home. And that's now a link, but it looks like a button. And then you've got the Figma example below. So the designer is able to say, yes, this looks like how it should look. And then you've got further compositions. The whole compositions that I built for each one, the disabled, the white button, et cetera, and then your properties at the bottom of what this button accepts, right? Children, primary, secondary, white, as, and what it does, etc. So this makes it easier to be able to use that component and decide if that component is good or not. And then you've got the tests, which are live. So if you had clicked on the test button, you'd actually see all those tests, right? And you can see, this is the one I created loads of tests for. Not everyone has such a good test, but this is like, you can actually just read this as a documentation kind of thing and say, I know what this component does, and I trust this component just by looking at, that test. And if you want to see the test file, you could open the code file and, actually see the test, right? And we didn't look at the dependencies either. Actually, this one doesn't have any dependencies. So if you clicked on dependencies, there's nothing there. But if we went back to the shoe store, you would actually see a load of dependencies, and you can see like how everything is built up. So this one's quite a lot, right? So it's got quite a lot of dependencies because it's an application. So it's got like everything. But if you took something like the shoes card, you might see something a little bit smaller and a bit easier to digest down the bottom there, the shoes card. So this is your product card, right? And that's just the composition, and then the test. So this is easier to see in dependencies, right? The shoes card is made up of the button, the card, the heading, the image, the text, and the currency, right? And those can be reused across multiple, the button is used various times, the image is used various times, currency is only used in this one, etc. So basically when I'm building this, what I can do is I can use the import button. So there's another button there at the use one that asks you if you want to install it or import it, right? See the green use box, and it says import shoes card to your workspace, right? Now, this is where you're able to actually take in components from different repos and build, pull it in. That component is now in your workspace. So in this case, if we were in the base UI, well, it wouldn't be, it'd be more like you're in the shoe store and you want to pull in the button component, right? Because the button component belongs to that component library, that base component library, right? It's in a different repo, but now you want to pull it in because you want to make a change because maybe you have superpowers and I don't know, the team who are working on that button, they've gone on holidays and there's a bug and you need to fix it. And you don't want to have to clone another repo or basically pull it down just to kind of fix that button. So you can pull it in. And also just for developing, right? Because you want to see what that button looks like if you made those changes to your search bar, to your product card, what it would look like, how it would look, etc. So you pull it in, the code is now there in your workspace, and then you make that changes. You can then decide, I don't like it, and just remove it, or I like it, this is cool. I'm going to export a new version of this component, this button component. So you create a new version. Obviously, then the product card is going to get a new version because it's using that new button version. The search bar is going to get a new version because it's using the new button version. And then you basically say, right, now you don't live here. This is the shoe store and you live in the base UI in the component library. So get out of my workspace and you just eject it. And then it just gets removed. And now it's not in your code base anymore. And, you continue your daily life.
So that's really cool. But if that is a dependent of so if the shoe store is a dependent of the base UI, does the base UI get like a pull request, or how does that work to update the version there where it's dependent from?
So in this case, when you go back to the base UI, the other components are not going to know that there's been another version. So you'd have to basically do a bit import where you get, it gets the latest version, and then it says, and then it will update those, right? So you'll say a checkout latest, and like you're doing your get differences, you can basically say bit diff, see the differences, bit checkout to the latest version, and then you can create those, update those to the new version. And then at the moment, I'm doing all that in the terminal. When Ripple CI comes out, you'll be able to do it more on a CI level. You can also, some companies have put in GitHub in the middle for their continuous integration. So that's being done through pull requests and something. It just depends on how you're working, how your team wants to work,
how your workflow is. Okay, that makes sense.
It'd be really cool, like in Figma, if you have kind of your library that you can pull from, like your component library, and it says, "Do you want to update these things?" Like something like that would kind of be neat too.
Yeah, from Figma direct, like definitely.
Oh, yeah. Like just
or the designer just designs it and it just changes, you know? Why do you even need a developer?
Let's just get to that. Isn't that like Webflow, right?
Is there like a single source of truth with these components too? Like what UI owns it? Does that make sense?
What UI owns it? So you mean like,
so you can use it anywhere, you can update it anywhere, but if somebody, you didn't want to push changes to it, who controls like the version, the main version, the single source of truth of the component?
Yeah, so the main version is, I don't know, it's controlled by bit, for example. So it basically means, and I've done this at a developer level, where I've had components that I thought were base components, and then like someone comes along and says, that's not really a base component, right? That should belong to the e-commerce team, because no one's ever going to use this currency as a base component. That's more e-commerce stuff. So put it in there. And because you're able to easily move the component in there, you just, change it there and decide, right, now you're going to live here. You just have to basically like tell it, now you live here instead of there. Okay. But then you'd have to update your links and stuff. Now, when you're importing things into Bit, you import it to where it's basically from, right? So if you're in base UI, that's going to be like where your component lives, right? If you decide to then change that, you have to kind of do a little bit of work and say, right, and then you'll probably end up breaking things because it's meant to have been in base UI. So I would do this at developer level. Then at developer level, you're changing things, you move things around, and you're not going to, break anything, etc. And if not, what you can do is you can just deprecate a component, and then you can basically say, right, you're deprecated because I've moved you to this one, and now no one used that component because it's now got a new name and it's under this scope. So there's so many different ways to do it, but yeah, everything is kind of like in Bit, and it should stay in base UI in Bit unless you deprecate it. But in GitHub, you could actually put it somewhere else into a different repo because you're pulling it in, and then you can say, and GitHub doesn't care if you're here, there, or anywhere, right? It's not important to GitHub where your code is stored. So you could start off as one big massive monorepo, and then you can start splitting it up into different repos. And it doesn't matter once your scope is the same, which is what Bit cares about, because that's what the npm install when you're using it is the same. So it doesn't matter what repo it lives in. Okay. Or if it could be in 4 repos if you want to. If you wanted to get crazy, you could do that as well, which I don't know why you'd want to, but you could.
I will say that no matter what, organizationally, this always becomes a challenge, especially like owning something. So if you have one team that always needs changes and they're asking for it, excuse me, and then they come in and say, you're not moving fast enough, we're just going to write it ourselves. That's where the like really painful parts start ending up. And it kind of gets back to that, Brittney, on the whole, like who owns the actual piece. It's like, well, they own the button, but then we wrapped the button and extended the button, and that's now our button. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. So it becomes a serious challenge at the organization level.
But sometimes there cannot be the one button that does everything, and sometimes it's like, if you really want to make all these changes to it, you can just create your own button that does this super cool thing that no one else wants. And that's totally cool, right? And you've got to sometimes be able to make those decisions as a team and say, actually, we're gonna maintain 2 buttons because it makes sense, because this one has a hell of a lot of JavaScript behind it. It's gonna like slow other people's down. And we don't need to do that to other people. So, this is a bad example, but you know what I mean.
Oh, totally.
No, that's perfect example, actually. It is. People are going more and more towards trying to do away with JavaScript. So you might have a component like a modal that has no JavaScript and then one that needs JavaScript. So I completely get that.
Very cool. All right. I think that summarizes a lot of what Bit's doing. Anything else, Debbie, before we pivot?
I think everyone should just like play around with it. Like you have to play with it, Alex, Brittney. Test it out, give us feedback on what you think. But it's fun. It's a different way of thinking at first, because you really have to think in components, and that's where we want the world to go towards. It's component driven. Because we need to start breaking things up into smaller pieces to make them reusable so that we can scale better. And so that we're not just like, creating all this code and repeatedly creating the same code again and again and again, and then trying to maintain it. And then 6 months down the line, someone says, we're going to change our brand. And like, again, and then you got to like change that logo component across like how many applications, and it's a nightmare. So we need to make developers' lives easier. And I believe that's what Bit does. So check it out.
I think Bit is doing a really good job at visualizing that too, like those dependency graphs and everything that you have in there with the documentation and being able to update props and things. That integration in itself is huge for component-driven development. So
yeah,
I've created so many design libraries and component libraries, and like over the last 10, 15 years, it's amazing, like the differences and the further we can get to this. And I think we joked about it, but if we could have like the marketer in Figma just create something and then push it out, like the better, right?
I think we're getting there. I think Figma is like leading the way for the web and like pushing these component systems like into more integrations. And I'm very excited for where it's going.
Same.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Cool. Well, let's switch over to our Purrfect picks. And I was trying to somehow segue from atomic design to your first pick, but I couldn't manage it. So go ahead. What's your first pick, Debbie?
Well, seeing that you're going into atomic design, I'm going atomic habits, right?
Yeah.
So this book is absolutely amazing. If you haven't read it, you should all read it. And it's like, what is it about? It's about being able to change like a small habit, make a small habit in your life that's going to end up giving you or gaining, like, so you can gain more, right? To give you an example, just something very, very, very small, such as if you're like trying to get into running, right? For example, running is hard. So you might say, I'm not able. Well, if you can just like make a habit of saying, right, I'm going to just run just 1 kilometer a day, right? And then you just go and do it. And if you make a habit of just doing 1 kilometer every day, that 1 kilometer means you're going to improve by say 1%. And after a while, you're going to be able to do like even more, right? And this, the same in tech. If you just learn, I've been trying to do it where I never have time to learn more. I'm always like so busy. I'm always doing other things. And I'm like, my React skills need to improve. How do I find the time to improve my own skills? And then it's like, I'm going to create a habit. Every morning I get up, I'm going to spend half an hour, just studying. I'm not going to like turn on any social media, nothing. And I'm going to spend half an hour just doing that. And if you create that habit, then you end up like doing so much more. And that's basically what this book is about, creating those little habits so that you can, gain so much more. But definitely it's an amazing book.
Awesome. Love it. Great pick. I struggle to build those habits in, so I'm definitely gonna have to pick this up.
Yeah, it is a really good book.
What is your first pick?
Yeah, I was looking for some Bit content, and I was talking a little bit earlier about Svelte would be great because it's a compiler with Bit, and I found this blog post on how to build a Bit compiler for Svelte. So maybe in the works, maybe you guys could find this person and see what they're doing. But I'm very excited about the future of where Svelte's going and how it's going to compile and build more things together, so we don't have one team could use React, one team could use Vue, and it doesn't matter because it's all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in the end. So if we could compile all that away and use less JavaScript in the process too, it's great.
And then you've got no performance issues because it's just all normal code.
Yeah, and I know Astro's doing a really good job at that too. Astro is crazy. Like it allows you to build whatever you want, and it just all in a build step like compiles into the stuff that you need.
We're going to have to get somebody on for Astro.
I know.
Wink, wink, nod, nod. Okay. What's your second pick?
My second pick is some rollerblade wheels that I took off of my office chair and put on some rollerblade wheels. I heard this on Syntax, I think. Maybe Wes Boss was the person that was like saying that this works really well. And it does. I do have really thick carpet and it's not the best, but it's way better than the other wheels. So if you had any kind of like low carpet or hardwood or anything, it is like on a skating rink.
I find myself not wanting to move around. Does this like float you around all day, or can you like lock them?
Well, like I said, I have long carpet. So, I mean, it's not.
For those on audio, she's wiggling around in the video.
Yeah. I'm showing my chair moving on my lawn carpet, which with my other wheels I couldn't do. It was so hard to even push myself back from my desk. So
That's crazy. Those are cool. Nice. My first pick, Cassie Williams put out this nice blog post. I don't even know. I just stumbled across it. I don't know.
Oh, the README project.
Yes,
From
exactly.
GitHub. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the README project that she has. This is such a great, like, anyone that's listening that you're just getting into tech or like looking for your first job in general. This is an amazing article. She kind of walks through the entire process. And I think it
looks like she gives you templates too to use, which is awesome.
There's tons of cool stuff in here. So for sure, check this out as part of the README project.
Nice.
My second pick, I finally got to see, which so just a little background on James Bond, No Time to Die. This was the first or the last, how do I say it? This movie was supposed to come out the next week before we got shut down for COVID. And so I've had to wait like a year and a half.
A year and a half.
To finally watch this movie because they wanted to wait till theaters.
Well, was it worth it? Was it worth it?
It was really good. It was a very nice ending to like the series. So I would highly suggest going to see it if you like James Bond. I know there's a lot of critics from James Bond, so I understand those, but I thought it was great. Daniel Craig's still an amazing actor in all these. I think I read an article about him feeling like he can't do it anymore because he just physically can't keep doing it. So I thought that was pretty awesome.
Yes.
All right, Debbie, thank you so much for showing off Bit and throwing some awesome, perfect picks in. I'll have to read the Atomic Habits.
Yep. And then tell us about the new habits you created and how your life improved because of it. You do a whole podcast session on that.
I think that is a great idea. I'm going to have to read this book on vacation and then come back with a whole pod on it. Sound good, Brittney? Can we do that?
Sounds great.
All right, I'll buy one and send it to you. All right, thanks again, Debbie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
See you later.
Thank you. Later.
Ciao.